Policy failure on climate change is going to put enormous pressure on both the military and the health communities because, in effect, they'll be our first responders to the consequences of failing to address climate change. Anybody who thinks that a world that's 2 or 4 degrees hotter will be healthy or secure is kidding themselves. They haven't actually understood what climate change means.
The biggest indirect effect of climate change on health is social change, which includes migration and conflict.
Well, we in the military organisation operate across the whole of the world. We need to understand the environment in which we're going to be operating, and we need to understand the political, environmental and other stresses that might actually precipitate conflict in the future.
It's not that climate change in itself is like to start a conflict, but the impact of the second and third order consequences. When people lose their land, their livelihood, what do? Do they migrate? Do they migrate within a country, between countries? Is it organised, or is it chaos? Does it cause tension? Or if they have no livelihood, do they find something which is legal, or are they vulnerable to recruiting into organised crime or even terrorism?
So soldiers and the Ministry of Defence, those sorts of people who begin to talk more openly about the threat that climate change poses to security and the wars that are already happening around the world, the conflicts that will happen due to water shortage, fuel shortage, food, land shortages, displaced people, refugees, those sort of issues that are increasingly already with us and are going to become a much greater problem over the next 10, 15 years.
There's a band that runs around the world, centred on the equator, where there's already problems with health, food shortages, water shortages, demographic challenges, and we've seen conflict there in the past. Conflict is partly due to the results of the governments in those countries not necessarily having the capacity and resilience to deal with it. Climate change is going to have its greatest effect. It's also where the world's trade routes run. We're a globalised society. We're all dependent on trade of some form or other, imports, exports, and in particular for us in Europe, energy, but also food and other goods coming from the Middle East and further afield. Same for China, 75% of their oil goes through the Malacca Strait. So we've got a global problem which is potentially going to affect global stability.
And so when you add those things up of disease, economic collapse, plague, pestilence, famine, starvation, you end up with mass migration. And if you get mass migration into resource-poor areas, you get conflicts and you get wars. And I come back to the fact that health has always been driven worldwide by poverty and war. And in the end, that's what's going to be the most rapid ramping up, I think, and impacts on health in the coming few years.
If there are food shortages or resource shortages, those powerful nations that have military might will, in the end, when pushed, defend the interests of their societies using whatever means at their disposal.
Many of the areas of the world which are suffering from serious health problems, serious security problems, serious climate change problems are the same.
All of us are at risk because we live in such a tightly connected world.
For too long, I think climate change has been framed as an issue that affects economies or affects polar bears.
The military security part is a key piece of the jigsaw.